A very good morning to all. On behalf of the Center for China Study at the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Institution of Eminence Manipal, it is my honor and privilege to welcome you all for the flagship 17th All India Conference of China Studies, organized by the China Studies Center in partnership with the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. The theme for this year is Understanding China in a Turbulent World, Geopolitical Contestation and Cooperation. I would request the esteemed dignitaries to kindly proceed to the stage. Professor Alka Acharya, Dr. Seshadri Chari, Lieutenant General MD Venkatesh, Vice Chancellor, Professor Venkat Raman, Professor MD Nalapat, Professor Madhavan Palat, and Dr. Anand V. Before you take the chair, I'll request all the dignitaries to kindly come to the front of the stage. We'll quickly take a group photograph. But without further ado, I would like to begin with the session. We'll start by the session by the welcome remarks by Professor Alka Acharya, Honorary Director, Institute of Chinese Studies, Professor and Chair, Center for East Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, to deliver the welcome remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Namaskar. Good morning to all, and a very special good morning. And well, I'll right away say thanks to all the dignitaries on the stage. Time is precious. I'm going to take just 2 minutes. I believe our Vice Chancellor here has to leave early. So this is, of course, the most delightful part of the conference, when you welcome people to a feast. And indeed, the 17th All India Conference of China Studies will be a feast, I can assure you about that. With this edition, the AICCS has become firmly entrenched in the field of China studies in India. And the Institute of Chinese Studies is the proud inheritor of this legacy, which was started more than 2 decades ago by a group of scholars who envisioned the China studies field as one in which all scholars from different parts of the country, in different institutions located in different disciplinary contexts, would come together on a platform and enrich the field by their deliberations, their ideas, their research. And while many of the original group have passed on, the scholars who started this initiative are still guiding the forward growth and movement of this conference. And I dare say, maybe not with complete confidence, but with a reasonable degree of confidence, that we have fulfilled many of those objectives. What is crucial about the AICCS is its clear focus on scholarly and university-based scholarship. In the beginning, we had actually toyed with the idea of partnering with other research organizations or think tanks, but it appeared to be much more productive in terms of the ripples that we created, in terms of the ecosystem that we were seeking to build, to locate it in a university firmament. And that has indeed, again, proven to be something very substantial, because it has, over the last decade, 2 decades, created this amazing network of China scholars who are still linked to each other, even though now they are scattered all over the world. What is also critical about locating it in a scholarly milieu is that, if I were to take a simile from yoga, people here breathe not from the chest but from the stomach upwards. We take a deep dive and we try and locate things in a historical perspective, bring out the kind of connectivities over a long spectrum of time, not just look at issues, and if we look at the theme today, geopolitical contestation and cooperation, not look at it as something that has just emerged out of the blue, something new for us. It may have new features, but it has long lineages. And our keynote speaker for the day today would once again refresh our memory about those lineages. Hobsbawm spoke about the long 19th century, the short 20th century. Scholars have already started talking about the end of the American century. Is this just something that has come up? I think all of you students here would have definitely read Henry Luce's very iconic article in 1941 about why it was necessary for America to come and take the lead, reshape international relations. And I'm wondering, as we look at the rise of China and look at the debates around the rise of China, whether we are not come to a similar, if not the same point, where you have China now deciding that it has to take the leadership and reshape the world in its own image. I think these are some elements that come into the debate on contestation and cooperation. And what we would look forward to, and the way in which we have organized these sessions, is that we are not just looking at the rise of China as simply a challenge. And it's not just because that it is one of the greatest economic and military powers today, or that it is bigger than 30 Asian economies combined, or that it is creating these alternative institutions. We are looking at something far more fundamental. And the scholars who will debate these issues today will show us different facets of this challenge. It is vital that we study this in a proper, in-depth manner and try and not just get swayed by the opinions of the time. This is what the AICCS is about. Locate China studies in a scholarly and research-based matrix. So with those few words, I would like to once again thank, this would of course come at the end, but once again thank the China Studies Center, Manipal, for making this collaboration possible and opening us to yet another set of students. I'm missing my friend and colleague, former colleague at GNU, Professor Vijayalakshmi, with whom we had many discussions as well. But to all you young students, my especially warm welcome, and I hope you navigate the next 2 days with as much of taking in as we hope to give out. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for setting the precedent as well as introducing the guests to the very inception of this conference and the idea of understanding and knowing China. Now, I'd like to invite the chair, Dr. Seshadri Chari, Chairman, China Studies Center, Department of Geopolitics and International Relations at Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Manipal, who will be chairing this inaugural session. And I will invite him to give his few words. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Amrita. I place on record my greatest, sincere thanks to our Honorable Vice Chancellor for accepting to be here to give us the inaugural opening remarks on this conference. It's a very busy schedule. It has been a very busy schedule for him for the last almost a month or so. So he arrived out from outside India yesterday, and then immediately he has been on the job. I also, it's a great honor that we have some of the best brains on geopolitics, India-China relations, and those who have been veterans in the armed forces, those who have been veterans as far as the academic session is concerned. So the whole idea when I attended the 15th, I think, in Goa, the 15th AICCS in Goa, and then the 16th one in Hyderabad was also attended by two of our representatives, Amrita and Anand. So we have been discussing this issue with Alka for a long time, and there was a lot of concurrence on this issue that we as a emerging economy, we as one of the oldest civilizations should study more about the civilizational entities in geopolitics. So geopolitics is all about, it's a dynamic subject. There is no permanency as far as geopolitics is concerned. And in this dynamics, there are certain elements, there are certain things that don't change. And the most important element that doesn't change is the civilizational existence of certain countries. So the civilizational existence has been there has been a continuity as far as the existence of that particular civilization is concerned. The dispensations may change, the governments may change. So governments do not really represent that particular civilization. So when you talk in terms of China, the present government need not necessarily represent China. China is something more. So China is something far beyond this particular dispensation that is there in Beijing now. Similarly, if you go to any other civilization, these civilizations have existed for a long time. One of the oldest civilizations, the Persian civilization, is still existing. Incidentally, Persian language is the only language in the world which is the language, the official language of the country of its origin since beginning. But it is no longer Persepolis. The dispensation in Persia, what we call Iran today, does not really represent Persia. That does not mean the civilization is gone. Some civilizations exist. As it was said that kuch baat hai ki hasti mitti nahi hamari. What is that hasti? What is it that gives that civilization strength? How is it that the civilization exists? And what changes does it make to the geopolitics of the world as of today? So this world order keeps changing. So who contributes to the world order? What should be the idea of world order? What should be our outlook towards the world order? So these are all some of the issues that requires a lot of discussion, debate, research and understanding. So from that point of view, I think ICS is doing a monumental job as far as creating this kind of a critical mass of experts who would think in terms of futuristic studies as far as these civilizations and the geopolitical existence of the dynamics is concerned. So it was from that point of view that we suggested that one of these AICCS we should be able to do from China Study Conference at Manipal. I'm obliged to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, whom we spoke to about 6 months back, and he readily agreed, and he has extended all support to this conference. So we will have another 2.5 days of brainstorming on all these issues. So I welcome all of you to participate in all these sessions and make this conference and the idea of this conference a great success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for setting the tone to the conference, as well as the precedent as to why is it important to have the AICCS at Manipal. Without further ado, I would like to now invite the convener for the 17th AICCS, Professor G. Venkat Raman, who is professor at the Indian Institute of Management, Indore, and honorary fellow at Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi, to deliver the convener's remarks. Over to you, sir.
Namaste and very good morning to all of you. Respected Vice Chancellor, Lieutenant General Dr. MD Venkatesh, Mahe Manipal, Professor Alka Acharya, ICS Honorary Director, and Professor JNU Center for East Asian Studies, Professor MD Nalapat, Honorary Director, DGIR Mahe, Chair Mr. Chari, Chairman China Study Center, DGIR Mahe, Professor Madhavan Palat, our keynote speaker, my co-conveners for this conference who have spent sleepless nights in the last 1 month or maybe more than that, Dr. Amrita and Dr. Anand, and all the young scholar participants, because in the domain of scholarship, one is forever young. So let me briefly introduce to all of you the idea of All India Conference of China Studies. The All India Conference of China Studies was initiated in the year 2006, and this year, 2024, we are all witnessing the 17th chapter. The idea of All India Conference of China Studies was started with a very novel idea that, if China Studies is going to be built upon in India, one cannot confine oneself to only New Delhi. So therefore, the idea was that every year ICS should be going to different regional academic institutions, have a tie-up with them, see what they are doing about China, and bring out one special theme which is in alignment with what that particular institution is doing. In the process, AICCS has traveled the length and breadth of the country. ICS had tie-ups with leading academic institutions like IIT Guwahati, IIM Kozhikode, leading universities in India, both national and regional, like Central University, Hyderabad, Goa University, Sikkim University, and many more. So the idea is that, ICS collaborates along with a regional academic institution and raises awareness about China studies, especially among the budding scholars, the master's level, and at the initial stages of their doctoral studies. This year's special theme, as mentioned earlier, is Understanding China in a Turbulent World, Geopolitical Contestation and Cooperation. Well, in 1991, just after the Cold War, Luttwak said that, he came up with a brilliant essay, From Geopolitics to Geoeconomics, Logic of Conflict to Grammar of Commerce. But now what we are seeing is, it is the boundaries or the lines demarcating geopolitics and geoeconomics are increasingly getting blurred, whereby one is not very sure what is geopolitics and what is geoeconomics. In fact, a recent Goldman Sachs report has said that 2020 is the age of geopolitics. We are witnessing in a very quick time the world transiting from the world of complex interdependencies, as Kyohan and I put it, to a world of weaponized interdependencies. So the decoupling debate, which started with Trump, within a short span of 4 years or so, has again got transformed. So from decoupling, we're talking of de-risking. The problem with, say for example, United States is, in its policy, it has to ensure that how it cannot decouple China, it has to engage China, ironically, not to ironically to have more control over, how China is participating in the international system. And right now, in this world of weaponized interdependencies, we are seeing, we don't know which world we are in. Some say we are unipolar, some say bipolar, and some others say multipolar. And speaking about multipolarity, India is definitely one of the, or perhaps the single most leading swing state. So given this, it is only natural that we come up with this theme. Now let me take you to some of the key highlights of this year's conference. The most important part of this whole conference has been very generous collaborators and who have been very forthcoming in funding the conference. So to begin with, the Ministry of External Affairs, thanks a lot to the Ministry of External Affairs for being partners. Thanks a lot to ICSSR, Indian Council of Social Science Research, who have also been generous in funding this conference. RIS and Janyu Technology, both of them have also contributed, and they are our knowledge partners for this year's conference. The keynote, which we will be hearing very shortly, is to be delivered by a very distinguished scholar, historian, Professor Madhavan Palat, and his talk is titled Geopolitics as a Theory to Imagine a Unipolar World. We are also going to have a special lecture to be delivered by Lieutenant General Arun Kumar Sahni, and his topic is, quote-unquote, Challenges of 21st Century Warfare for India with special focus on technology. We are having 3 special sessions, one on state of the field, accessing discourses in China studies, one on artificial intelligence and governance of technology, and another one on impact of geopolitical factors on economy and trade. We are having 7 thematic panels. When we made a call for abstracts, we had more than 85 abstracts, out of which we selected 40 odd, and to submit full papers. And out of that 40 odd papers, we ended up selecting 28 papers. So the various thematic panels are built around domestic politics of China, society and culture and religion, China and international politics, China's foreign policy and diplomacy with special focus on Indo-Pacific and Asian regions, China's military modernization, and China and geopolitics of technology. So with these words, I once again welcome all of you to a 2.5-day feast of Sinology. I'm sure all of you are going to benefit immensely. Thanks a lot. Wish you the very best. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much, sir, for outlining and consolidating the theme for the 17th AICCS at Manipal. Now, I would like to invite Vice Chancellor Mahe Manipal, Lieutenant General Dr. M.D. Venkatesh, to deliver the opening address. Before you proceed, sir, I'd like to give an introduction to him. Lieutenant General M.D. Venkatesh is leading the Manipal Academy of Higher Education, an institution of eminence and a deemed university, as Vice Chancellor, as a founding faculty member of the Department of Medical Education Technology at Armed Forces Medical College. He has made significant contributions to the field of medical education. He has held all academic positions from Reader to the Dean of prestigious Armed Forces Medical College, Pune. During his 38-year career in the armed forces, Dr. Venkatesh held significant administrative positions such as Deputy Director General of Armed Forces Medical Services, Planning and Training, Director General of Armed Forces, Additional Director General of Armed Forces Medical Services, Dean of AFMC in Pune, and Commandant of AMC Center and College in Lucknow. Professor Venkatesh holds academic and administrative positions in addition to serving as an assessor for the Medical Council of India and the National Board of Examinations. He served as a governor of the Board of Governors for the Indian Academy of Otolaryngology and Head and Neck Surgery. Dr. Venkatesh was a distinguished member of the Medical Advisory Council for the newly commissioned National Medical Commission, as well as a member of the General Assembly of the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, which operates under the auspices of the Government of India. Lieutenant General M.D. Venkatesh has been honored with numerous awards and accolades for his outstanding contributions to the field of medicine. Among these awards are 2 commendations from the Chief of Army Staff and the prestigious Vishesh Seva Medal received from the President of India. Lieutenant General Dr. M.D. Venkatesh served with distinction for 38 years in the Armed Forces Medical Services before assuming the esteemed position of Vice Chancellor at Sikkim Manipal University. Over to you, sir.
Very good morning, everybody, and warm greetings to all of you from Manipal Academy of Higher Education, an institution of eminence deemed to be university. Distinguished personalities on the dais, off the dais, all the invited guests, resource persons of this very important conference, faculty, students, and all the delegates. I begin with a disclaimer that I am perhaps the only odd man out in this entire gathering, being a medical professional. Of course, now an academic administrator, I do not possess much in-depth knowledge of the topics that are being discussed here today. All my musings would be basically from general reading and interacting with friends and colleagues like all of you here. It's a distinct privilege for all of us at Manipal Academy of Higher Education to be hosting, which I feel is one of the most prestigious conferences, the 17th All India Conference of China Studies. And the importance of this conference is borne by the fact about the collaborating organizations which are joining hands with MAHE Manipal, Department of Geopolitics, Center for China Studies, in organizing this conference, and all the distinguished dignitaries who have come from all over the country, spread across disciplines from economics to politics to academic to services to you name it. And everybody is part of this very distinguished congregation today. And more so, I think this is very important to all those young students and the scholars who are in the back, that this perhaps may not find many occasions when you have to listen to such wonderful thought makers, thought leaders in this field, understanding the nuances of what happens in this very, very intricate, very, very complex, very, very, invigorating discussion on anything and everything about China, both at the bilateral level, India-China relationship, and also rest of the world and China, and India's role as we look forward to navigate difficult situations as we need to engage with China in a bilateral manner. I think to the distinctions of both the countries, I must say, all these years, we have kept this discourse, discussions, conflicts, confidence building measures, and measures that we take to improve relationships strictly bilateral. The other thing that has happened over a period of time is about the kind of newer groupings that have happened in the entire world. Economic groupings, military groupings, and also looking at even there are groupings within a very common factor which entire world struggles with in terms of environment and sustainable development goals. We are looking at distinct blocks advocating various other things. And to me, to be here today is a real honor and a privilege, and I thank Professor Chari, the chair of this conference, and Dr. Alka, the chair and the co-chair of this conference, for inviting me here today. And let me place on records the excellent work that is being done at the Department of Geopolitics at Manipal Academy of Higher Education. I mean, we are fortunate that two of the best known names, I would say two of the wisest men I have known, have been part of this department, Professor Nalapat and Dr. Chari. It's been, they have been the building blocks and the pillars of this department and taking it forward, not necessarily only in the Department of Geopolitics, across the entire sphere of the vertical of humanities, social sciences, and liberal arts in the university. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us in our journey. And to some of you who are part of the MAHE's journey, continue to be part of the MAHE's journey, thanks once again for being all the support that you're providing, especially to Professor Mahapatra and others. Just a brief about Manipal Academy of Higher Education. I think it's important for us to look at where we started, where we are, and where we are progressing as a university, because I personally feel there's a huge role for higher education institutions in every matter of concern to the humanity. Because when we say a university, it means a mini universe. It is literally every facet of an entire global activities that happen in a mini universe at a university level. Therefore, any fundamental change that we wish to make to the world, the change will have to begin at the university level. This is something I would like to look at. I would like to address the youngsters behind that. This is something that you need to look at it. There has to be an internalized change towards where we want to see the world, that you are going to inhabit for a longer duration than we are at this side of the dais. With regard to MAHE, the entire journey of Manipal began with a societal commitment of our founder, late Dr. T.M.A. Pai. Despite being a medical doctor who was promised of a very, very good professional career, he took to not only practicing his profession, but also looked at his own societal, internal that society to see that how she should bring a change in terms of providing education, quality education at affordable cost, bringing about quality health care at affordable cost, and more than anything else, economic empowerment for the entire community. Literally every sustainable development goal that we are talking about today, our founder thought about it close to 80, 90 years ago. This is where the entire edifice of Manipal Academy of Education is built on societal commitment. Once the first education institution, the Kasturba Medical College, first ever private medical school in India was started and established, the university has not looked back. Every second year, every third year, we've added institutions, we've added campuses, not necessarily only, and built other universities as part of the group, and also one of the most vibrant healthcare infrastructure and research infrastructure for the entire country. So therefore, the commitment and the ground on which, the premise on which the university was built is basically to address societal needs and to make things better for initially to the internal community, now to the entire world as a whole. With regard to MAHE, we have made tremendous progress. Today we rank number 4th in the National Institution Ranking Framework as a university. The only 3 other universities above us are public universities, which effectively means that Manipal Academy of Higher Education, an institution of eminence, is the largest, perhaps the best known multidisciplinary university in country, which is acknowledged by the National Institutional Ranking Framework. Over the years, we have made tremendous progress. Today, we are a highly research-focused institution. By the time the year ends, we would have published more than 5,500 journal articles. 80% of them would be in the Q1 and Q2 quartile. University functions under 3 verticals: humanities and health sciences. Health sciences vertical is one. Next one is technology and sciences vertical. Third one, which I feel is equally important, perhaps it's progressing at a pace that we want to, is the vertical on liberal arts, social sciences, law, management. That is another vertical, because we believe in a holistic education. We believe in providing the student a 360-degree global student experience for everyone who comes to the campus. We devote a lot of time and attention towards providing the right kind of infrastructure, the student life, ability to interact with people within the country, outside the country, and therefore I think we believe that we are providing a truly world-class education to our students in this campus and in all our campuses spread across the country and outside too. As a university, we have 4 campuses in India. This one is the largest, and we have 2 campuses offshore in Dubai and Malaysia. That's about the university, just for the people who have come from outside. But little bit about geopolitics and international relations. The Department of Geopolitics and International Relations is perhaps the first ever department to begin in a private university as a department. And today it offers master's program in geopolitics and international relations. And of course also does a lot of research. Multiple centers are there. One such center is the China Studies Center. So there's a lot of importance that is given by the university. Of course, very, very heavily guided, supported and taken forward by the 2 doyens I mentioned, Dr. Chari and Dr. Nalapat. Dr. Vijayalakshmi currently heads the department. She will be joining the conference because of certain personal reasons. She has to be away. And we have many people who have put their hand and built this department to the current stage. What is more important is the collaboration that the department has in the field of geopolitics and international relations, governmental bodies, think tanks, individual institutions, universities, abroad, both in the Europe and other places. I think there is a very, very cohesive and time-bound action plan for the department to ensure that what is current in the world is current in the department too, and in the department and the university. Within the university, the department collaborates with all our entities. I personally believe that today is the time for collaborations, cooperation. There is no boundaries as it is happening. The entire world is now looking at more and more getting bound by boundaries and the individual interests of the countries rather than looking at the world as a whole. That is my thought process. I think this conference should come out with certain guidelines or consensus regarding how do we address all this protectionist attitude of various governments, various bodies, various groupings, which is perhaps impeding the impeding our effort towards making this world a better place to live in. Today's theme of understanding China in a turbulent world and geopolitical contestation and cooperation, I think is the most apt. I've gone through the program booklet. Literally every aspect which concerns China, both in the bilateral and the multilateral forum, is being addressed. China's internal policies, China's international policies, China's economy, China's religion, China's civilization, and the economics, the trade, every aspect concerning the current scenario within China and outside of it, and its impact on the global progress and prosperity is being looked at. I think perhaps this is one of the most comprehensively, designed conference I can ever think of when we look at this particular conference. Let me compliment the entire organizing team and the scientific committee for doing this wonderful, wonderful exercise, and the people who are drawn to address and discuss and muse over these various themes are also the best known names in the country in their own fields. I'm sure at the end of this conference, all the attendees, all the delegates will be extremely benefited, and also it will also provide a forum for all the experts to interact and also discuss and develop newer thought process. How do we address issues concerning China at the end of this conference? I presume that the conferences will come out with a consensus document which should serve as the guide for the next 5 years. How should policies towards China be looked at? How should people-to-people contact should build up? How should India respond to its bilateral challenges and also its very difficult situation in balancing the act in multilateral forum with regard to various groupings? I think this perhaps is the best congregation of best minds should come out with a consensus document which should serve as a guide to all of us and also to the other decision-making bodies within the country and outside of the country. I'm I had been having discussions with Dr. Chari, and I'm always reminded of the 3 things which he keeps telling me about China: cooperation, competition, and conflict. I think Chari has put these thoughts into my mind, and we've discussed a few times. I think it's very important to realize that how does India respond to China in these very important matters of being cooperative, being competitive, and being in conflict. All 3 things are very, very contradictory to each other, but however, we need to address them. How do we cooperate with China in matters of mutual interest? How do you address the competitiveness? Without doubt, the entire world acknowledges that China is way ahead of many countries or most countries in trade, technology, economics, research and development, in communication, in space, in military. Every which way, I think China is way ahead of most countries. I think this is an acknowledgement where we have to begin with how do we address these problems, keeping these important points in mind. And something which is very important also is that other than for the experts who are here or on the dais, much of the things that happen in China, we do not come to know. It's an opaque system, hardly any communication, hardly any understanding. Whenever we even interact or speak to each other, it's only very few things we understand. Even when we interact with universities or research collaborations, it is not like an open, access to information about China. It's always guarded, we really don't know what is happening. And I'm sure the experts may have some insights when they do more readings, interact with other people in the field. However, this is something that, how do we go about unraveling China to the rest of the world in this current context? It wasn't so previously. Dr. Chari has mentioned about the civilizational exchanges between India and China, between various other civilizations. It was absolutely free. People-to-people movement was excellent. There was similarity in the languages portion in this artificial line of actual control or borders. The culture and the exchange was happening. Religious exchanges were very, very prominent. Learnings and education was a lot of exchange used to happen. But unfortunately, this constricted international boundaries between countries a particular roadblock to all these things which were excellent for the human development and human progress. With this regard, how can we look at China with these 3 C's. Cooperation, I mentioned, we need to find ways to cooperate in areas where there's a mutual benefit and agreement. Competitive, India has to get more competitive with regard to China if we need to be on a level playing field. Though there's a lot of developments have happened to the entire world. COVID-19 pandemic was just not a health issue. It put the entire world behind by 10 years because so much of dependence was there on Chinese manufacturing, on Chinese supply chain, on Chinese made things to the entire world. The entire world went back by a decade and we are still recovering. Therefore, that brought about some realization that we need to become more self-reliant. Atmanirbharata was one issue. We are moving in that direction, but a lot needs to be done. Therefore, we need to constantly look at how do we get better if not better at least at par with China in everything that we do. 2 things, as an armed forces person, I am always looking at what happened in our borders. 2 things clearly changed the way India responds to China. Of course, other than the 62 war, we had one conflict in Nathula. That also, there was a fair amount of equality in that response. What happened in Doklam and then at recently in Galwan has changed the perception about India, not only to the Chinese, but also to ourselves and also to the entire world. I think the armed forces did an extraordinary job. People do not understand unless you visit those places and see what happens there. I think the current media, both in the electronic, the print, and the social media, are creating myths and misinformations about what happens there. But the fact remains that one of the most resolute responses to this aggression was put up by the Indian Armed Forces. I think that makes me feel so very proud. Beyond that, the government of the day also took a lot of good measures in terms of improving border infrastructure, empowering the armed forces with the requisite hardware, the software, both in terms of weapon platforms, both in terms of creating newer areas, moving weaponry right forward onto the borders. I think this response the China never expected, neither the entire world. I think today where we are, 4 years down the line, we are talking to each other. We have almost reached a settlement on most of the cantankerous issues that were there at the border. More than anything else, there is a move forward from a total freeze to a thaw, and I'm sure the flow will start a little forward. I think this is on the bilateral side, but on the multilateral front, India has been doing a very balanced act. Doing at the current geopolitical situation, conflicts in Europe, conflict in Israel, and in other places, and more so, the 2 things but both China and India are vying for is their piece of cake in the global south. Both of us want to be very relevant to the global south. India with a very different perspective of being a Vishwa Bandhu, being supportive, being open, literally well-meaning for the entire global community, whereas Chinese, on the other hand, what we read and understand is about coercion, by loaning large amounts to these smaller countries, by establishing infrastructure projects, and later putting pressure on them to collaborate and to kind of a old colonization system has already started. This is seen in and around the Indian subcontinent and also seen in the African subcontinent. Now we are seeing it happening in the South American region. Therefore, this is a problem that how do we address this particular issue at a multilateral forum, still being relevant to both the China and India at the bilateral level, keeping that interest, keeping that cooperation open, and keeping the conflict away is something very, very important for all of us. How can higher education institutions play a role in this? I mentioned it. Any university is a mini universe, and therefore it's a big role to play in changing the mindset, putting new thoughts into the minds of the young learners, bringing in more international scholars into our fold, sharing our culture, sharing our learnings, working together as a global citizen will be the way forward for all of us. And to higher education institution must look at geopolitics and international relations as a very, very specialized subject, must support it to the fullest, encourage young students to take up this particular part of study, let it be part of the graduate level as a part of a minor or a major, and a master's level, a separate master's program. More and more should come up, and more research needs to happen. Universities should open up to think tanks, get more scholars, become active in the global affairs. And if the younger generation gets, I only see that, all of us on this side, we are well past our prime. It's for the people behind the entire, 50, 60 years of life is ahead of you. How do you want to live your life? How do you want to address the geopolitical situations? And then newer minds also will come up with newer thoughts, newer actions, and with the ever-changing, the technology adoption, you are better placed to adapt, move on, and I'm sure this conference will open up newer doors, newer thought process, and newer vision for the way forward, not only for bilateral India-China relationship, but also geopolitics at the global level. I'm extremely happy to be present here today, and hopefully I will interact with some of you in the later part of the evening. But welcome to Manipal Academy of Higher Education. I wish this extremely well-conceived and most timely conference all the very best. To all the resource persons, great gratitude from Mahe for making it convenient to come over here. To all the delegates, wishing you great academic and interactive sessions over the next 2.5 days. Wish this conference all the success. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, sir, for your insightful remarks, encouraging words, and best wishes for the conference. Now, I would like to invite Professor M.D. Nalapat, Honorary Director, Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, Manipal Academy of Higher Education, to deliver the special remarks. But prior to that, let me introduce a few lines on him. Madhavdas Nalapat was appointed India's first Professor of Geopolitics at the Department of Geopolitics and IR and UNESCO Chair for the Promotion of the Culture of Peace and Nonviolence by Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Manipal in 1999, a position he still holds. He is the Honorary Director of DGIR. He is an executive member of the Editors Guild of India, an associate of the National Institute of Advanced Studies, and an associate member of the United Services Institution. Presently, Professor Nalapat is the editorial director of ITV Media Network. He has previously held editorial positions at Mathrubhumi and the Times of India. He writes extensively for national and international publications. He has authored over a dozen books, including Cold War 2.0, Illusion versus Reality, 75 Years of Indian Foreign Policy, War, Peace, and a World Realigned, and the Practice of Geopolitics. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Amrita, for that generous introduction. And I'm delighted to be here. I am really happy that the chair and the co-chair that we have managed to hold this conference here. I would just like to say that as far as when I'm talking about China now, let me define China in terms of the Chinese Communist Party, define the CCP in terms of its leadership, its top leadership, and the topmost rung of the top leadership, which is basically the General Secretary, the Office of the General Secretary, and the panoply of facilitators who surround the General Secretary. When we talk about the policy of China, when we talk about the trajectory of China, essentially we're talking about decisions made by this particular group of people. So let's define China in terms of this group of people, at least where I am concerned, that is it. The second important point that we need to talk about is that, of course, this is it's a very complex country to understand. There's no doubt about it. When I wrote 75 Years of Indian Foreign Policy, it went through 3 drafts and was finally published by Rupa in 2022. The second book, Cold War 2.0, went into 3 drafts. The third book is about Xi's China, and it's into his 3rd draft. And I think it's not going to be enough to have a 3rd draft. It'll probably need one more draft at least. That shows the complex nature of the country, of the field. We're talking about civilization, we're talking about culture, we're talking about so many things. And the question is the impact of the CCP on all this. For example, Mao's Cultural Revolution. Has it had an impact on the essential culture of China? Because we find that a lot of the ancient civilizations that Dr. Chari has studied extensively are hardly there anymore. Fortunately, they are in India, but and they are in bits and pieces in China, but how much they are still present is I think a question that we need some more research on. A second important point that we need to research on, at least where China is concerned, is the relationship between China and the United States in a situation where a gentleman named Donald Trump has been re-elected as the President of the United States. He's going to be the 47th President. His Vice President is J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is what is very commonly called a China hawk. And practically all the Trump picks where policy is concerned are, I wouldn't call them China hawks, I'd call them China realists. These are individuals who, I mean, frankly, over the years, one runs into them, one runs into their views, and they're very clear about the need to essentially roll back the influence of China as defined here as the leadership, not the Chinese people, they're a wonderful people, not the country, not the civilization, not even the party of 100 million, where you have several people, but essentially the roll back what we are defining as China. So we're talking of decoupling. And if you were to ask a question, is decoupling working? The short answer would be an emphatic no. I mean, whether it's United States, whether it's India, we are hugely dependent on imports from China. China has had record imports into both the United States as well as India. But there are interesting nuances that we need to understand. And one of these nuances involves, for example, the closure of small tech companies in China, which were importing US tech. Now, practically all these companies, they're not startups in, as we call them in India, they're basically shell entities meant to siphon technology off from United States technological institutions, tech companies, and siphon this technology and basically then of course transfer it to other elements of the Chinese state. A lot of this kind of sensitive technology has now, the flow has slowed down significantly or stopped significantly. And so if you look at the number of these smaller companies that are shutting down over the last 2 or 3 years, they're significant. And I think in Trump age, having a little bit of insight into the kind of people he's now clustered around him, I think we are going to see a lot more of these smaller companies shut down in China. So change is happening. It is happening very clearly at the cutting edge of tech, which is what is very, very important in, for example, kinetic situations. If we are at war with China, it is cutting edge technology that's going to make the difference. Now, from that point of view, I believe that this decoupling is, it may not be looking like it's happening now if you look at commerce figures, but if you look at the first Trump term, you had people like Wilbur Ross, you had people like Steve Mnuchin, who frankly were anything but lukewarm towards China. They made a lot of, if I may say so, I'm not going to use any word, but for themselves and for the companies they operated out of China. But today's Trump, the picks for the equivalent positions are very clearly, whether it's a new Commerce Secretary, for example, or the likely Treasury Secretary, these are definitely China realists. They are not Steve Mnuchin. They are certainly not, individuals of that kind. It's a very different administration from the first. The first situation was a little, like we call strategic ambiguity. A little ambiguity was there because of these multiple strands. Today, the strand is much more unified, and that is going to have an impact on policy towards China and an impact on countries dealing with China, in the sense that whether one likes it or not, and it's probably unfair, it's a question of you're with me, you're with us, or you're with them, and you take sides. And that was the rationale behind my writing Cold War 2.0, that there is a Cold War 2.0 taking place, and I was looking at some changes in the United States, as I think some of the individuals in this room will testify. Regarding Donald Trump, I was fairly upbeat, but this time around, unlike the last time he came, I was a little socially correct. And I said, if he comes. And finally, the day before the election results, I said, if he comes and wins, he's going to get 300, well over 300 electoral votes. He did. So let me tell you that the change is taking place. And the change is taking place across the world, including in different parts of the world, where public opinion is changing because they are now identifying China with the China as defined, as the leadership and the panoply of facilitators of that leadership. Now, Xi Jinping, he's been considered to be a neo-Maoist. He suffered a lot under Mao. As a family, as an individual, he would have gone through trauma. If you look at that, I'm not sure that he is really a Mao loyalist, because Mao hated Confucius. He wanted to change Chinese culture, and he wanted to completely erase ancient Chinese civilization, and he hit upon this anti-Confucian movement for that, and he took ruthless action against those who, in his view, stood by that. Xi Jinping has sought to bring in Confucius, of course with modern characteristics. I'm not sure Confucius himself would recognize what he is supposed to be today, but that shows that he is not a Mao man, but he is doing it for the simple reason that he accepts the central premise of Mao, which is that the people of China, the overwhelming majority of the people of China, have a right to be numero uno in the world order. Now, that is something which a lot of people in China share. That's a very strong foundation for popularity. A lot of people share that view. But the question now that is beginning to be asked in the byways and lanes and even the villages is, yes, we want this to happen, but do we have the right leadership to make it happen? I think that question you saw during this, just about a year to a couple of years ago, the COVID protests, people banging pots and pans and things like that. It's very unusual in China to have that kind of a protest. And of course, and there had to be fewer consequences for a simple reason that the Chinese system is a pressure cooker with very few walls. If the pressure builds up across a certain level, then these few walls are just not going to operate. So when we talk about China as a 100-foot giant, when we talk about the China as a technological marvel, let's keep in mind these small Chinese companies whose technical owners, I mean, de facto, of course, it's some other entity, are now unemployed. Let's talk about the new administration that is now going to come into Washington on January 20th. and the mindsets and chemistry of the people who are there, they are all realists. And I personally feel that the realism is what is important. I titled my book Cold War 2.0, brought out last year, as Illusion versus Reality. Yes, we can live in illusion, but that is not a very healthy prospect. If you've got a problem, for example, medically, and you have illusions about the problem, it's certainly not the best way of treating it. The best way of treating it is to face the reality and treat it. So may I point out that this is not a 100-foot giant. As far as India is concerned, we could be in a sweet spot, and I've said this multiple times, and I'm just going to repeat this possibly for the 900th time, that the Chinese took great advantage of Cold War 1.0 by leapfrogging in technology, economic development, etc., by taking a clear strategic view of the issue. I think it's important for us in India to take a very clear strategic view of Cold War 2.0, and the opportunity that it is presenting to India is in its dimensions, of course much bigger because the time is now more, the 21st century. It is the same kind of opportunity that was presented to China back in the old Cold War, and which China, frankly, took advantage of with both hands. So, should India make choices? Well, I'm going to be a marketing guy and say, read my book. And, I'll have to work probably on a fourth draft, but hopefully the other book on Xi's China. But I'm not a pessimist on that at all. I'm not a pessimist. Why? Because the Indian people, they're the most amazing people around. And we are in a hall named after our founder, TMA Pai. And this institution, the Vice Chancellor mentioned a few of the attributes of this institution. It has grown from nothing. It has grown from a tiny little village where even a bicycle was considered to be what a Rolls Royce would have been in the equivalent period in the streets of London. And it has grown into something slightly larger than that. And I think that's testimony to our people. So I think TMA Pai was an Indian to the core. Our university in Manipal is also Indian to the core. And when we began geopolitics, and I'm very happy that my old friend and colleague Arvind Kumar is here, he launched the department. We began Dr. Ramdas Pai and Dr. Valyatan had the vision to say, why can't we talk in terms of geopolitics? Why do we say that our country has no policy? George Stanham and others said we have no policy. And can you come and head that department? Well, the fact is they had that vision, and as times are going by, Arvind, when finally there was enough, if I may say so, foundation to launch a department. Otherwise, people were confusing geography and politics. Why are you confusing geography and politics? What's the relationship? Geopolitics was something that was beyond anyone's imagination. When finally people started understanding that there is something, we thought it's time to have a department, and we set up a department, and I'm happy to say that department took off extremely well, and it's doing very well. And now we are reaching a different stage in which a lot of research is going on and a lot of activities are going on. But I do hope that the foundational department has been and will continue to be based on realism. Not what Stalin called as realism, but real realism. And having said that, I want to say that I am optimistic about our department. I'm optimistic about the university. I'm optimistic about my country. I'm optimistic for the world. The only point is we have to make strategic choices in the real world and in a realistic manner in a world that is evolving before our eyes. We have to read the signals right, understand them, and frankly, take advantage of them. There's nothing wrong in being an opportunist. I don't know why the term opportunism is met with such obloquy, because it is opportunity that has made the world transformed. And that is a healthy use of opportunism. It's not opportunism for zero-sum purposes, in which I gain, everybody else loses. It's actually win-win. And one of the reasons why the Chinese are doing badly, they talk a win-win and they act zero-sum. Across Africa, across Latin America, across Asia, even in countries like Nepal, you go and see, Chinese are now saying, oh, we are Taiwanese, we are not from the PRC, because they're not becoming very popular because of that zero-sum strategy. So opportunism needs to be combined with a win-win strategy, and I have every confidence that our country is going to ride on this opportunity and replicate in this period what China did under Deng Xiaoping. Thank you very much for listening to me so carefully, and Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, sir, for anchoring China, the turbulent world, and the geopolitical order in such beautiful manner. Without further ado, now the much-awaited talk, the keynote address by Professor Madhavan K. Palat on the title, Geopolitics as a Theory to Imagine a Unipolar World. Before I request you, sir, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker. Professor Palat was born in 1947, studied history at the University of Delhi and the University of Cambridge, and took his DPhil at the University of Oxford, specializing in late Imperial Russian history. He taught at the Center for Historical Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, from 1974 to 2004, and took early retirement. He was a visiting professor of Imperial Russian history at the University of Chicago in 2006 and National Fellow at the Institute of Advanced Study in Shimla in 2010 to 2011. He was appointed as the editor of the selected works of Jawaharlal Nehru in 2011, which he brought to completion in 2019. He has published on Russian workers and peasants, Russian imperialism in Central Asia, Russian and Soviet nationalities policies, Eurasianism, Mironov, Dostoevsky, History and Memory, Hobsbawm, Geopolitics, Socialism in India, Nehru and Democracy, amongst other works. He lectures on other aspects of Nehru's ideas and on current international affairs, especially Ukraine and Palestine. Over to you, sir.
Professor Alka Acharya and Professor Seshadri Chari, I'm deeply grateful to the Institutes of Chinese Studies and of the Manipal Academy of Higher Education for having been so kind as to invite me here and do me the honor of asking me to address you on this keynote today. Let me get straight on to the subject. I believe we are short of time, as usual it happens in such excellent conferences that are proposed here. And the subject is on geopolitics, as you know, as a theory. Let me start with asking the first question. How is it that this very word was first created or invented as late as 1899? And it became an obsessive compulsion throughout the first half of the 20th century to keep on discussing geopolitics and to generate theories about geopolitics. And thereafter it has become a standard usage and continues to be so for the reasons that I shall try to set out today. Before the 1880s or 90s, the world was rife with competitions amongst imperialist powers for the conquest of the world, and that conquest was completed only about the 1880s. And we had 6 imperialist powers then: the United States, Great Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and Japan. They had divided the world amongst themselves. And as long as they were competing, there was no concept of geopolitics at all. There's only concepts of imperialist competition and rivalries of various kinds. It's only when that competition came to an end that we suddenly discover, or people saw the need to devise a new concept of the nature of the competition that would be taking place in this world when the whole world has been divided and unified in this particular manner. That is, that it is no longer a world which is available for appropriation, an empty world by colonial conquest. There are no more empty spaces in the world. Everything has been partitioned. And so it is a closed world, as Halford Mackinder said. And once it is closed, the 6 imperialist powers turn in on themselves and compete against each other. Till then, they were not competing against each other. They were competing to conquer various parts of the world. Now that the world has been closed and no more options are available of an open frontier, as Frederick Turner said about America, and so many others said about various other parts of the world, you now have to turn on each other. And that leads to intensified and violent conflict amongst the great powers, the imperialist powers. And it is a sense of impending doom and of great opportunity also at the same time that these new concepts were devised. And it went on throughout the 1880s and 90s and up to the First World War. And then the doom did take place. The First World War was a world of such catastrophic proportions that they had never envisaged. And it went on into the Second World War. And it's only after that that the world stabilized in a completely different way. So we have a chunk of history from the 1880s or 1890s until 1945, a single chunk. And that is the time when the concept of geopolitics became a matter of such importance and such passion. And so many theories were worked out. And the centers of those theories were the United States, Britain, and Germany. These were the principal centers. Elsewhere, there might have been imitators and lesser theorists, but it's from here that you have the well-known names, of whom Rudolf Schelling, he's Swedish, but actually a German theorist, you might say, followed by Halford Mackinder, then Spykman or Spickman in America, and Haushofer and Carl Schmitt in Germany. I would limit myself to this lot. You could add George Kennan, finally, to round off the lot of theorists. Now, this half century is the time of proper geopolitical theory. And it came about because they now realize that the world is united, or unified, not united, anything but unified in this way. And they will be competing only amongst each other, and the competition is for the domination of the world itself, not for just acquiring some extra spaces here and there, like the imperial colonial powers were. If it is to be the domination of the world, all those who had a realistic aspiration to dominating or to creating an alliance which could be a partner in domination with others became the principal theorists or centers of geopolitical activity. That is why we find the greater centers were Germany, Britain, and America. And the theory was so worked out that it seemed as if the world was divided into two. You had the Atlantic world, consisting of America plus the Atlantic coast of Europe, because Britain belongs to the Atlantic coast, along with her allies France. And you have the rest of Europe dominated by, well, they were not quite certain who it's going to be dominated by, but it will be dominated in some sense by either Germany or Russia. That's how they first saw it in the course of the first half of the 20th century. It was not quite clear. With Japan as an associate of this grouping. So you have the whole Eurasian world conceived as one space, and the whole of the Atlantic world as another space. And these two titanic combinations will engage in a clash, finally, to decide who is to dominate the world. That is how these geopolitical theorists saw it. It has to go on into a domination of the whole world. It has to be, the world has to be dominated from a single center, because it is now unified. So it has to have a center, and this is how it will take place. So there will be an elimination round between these 6 great powers, and it actually happened, the elimination round. In the First and Second World Wars, there were the elimination. Britain, France, Germany, and Japan were eliminated, and it left behind the United States and the Soviet Union. Now, whether the Soviet Union remained in the round itself is uncertain, because it was always in a defensive posture. It did not have the capacity to really try to dominate the world. And this is one of Kennan's insights. The Soviet Union is actually not a challenger. It is an ideological challenger, but not a political, military, and strategic challenger to the United States. It doesn't have the capacity. So it carved out a space and retreated into what they call the socialism in one country under Stalin, and generally within that world of socialism, and they could not get out of it. It was trapped in its own shell. So the Soviet Union is an uncertain challenger. It is nothing like Germany was in the First and Second World Wars, and especially under the Third Reich in Germany was, when it made a serious bid to dominate the world by defeating the British Empire and taking on even the German Empire, taking on even the United States. It was a serious attempt, but of course it was defeated. That's the point. But it made the attempt. The Soviet Union did not, emphatically did not. The Soviet Union made an attempt only at leadership ideologically, and nothing more than that. And it limited itself to that. Otherwise, it adopted a defensive posture and then collapsed in 1991 the way we know it. And since then, it has not become a challenger at all. And there has been no other challenger, not China, I beg to say, in this situation. China has been the beneficiary of a vast amount of US support and has risen that way and is now facing the heat from the United States also. So, if the point is who is to be, where is the center going to be located and how it is going to happen, we have the history before us. The elimination rounds, finally the United States, and the United States clinging on to that position by one method or the other. By using China to balance the Soviet Union, that has been done, and China now being brought down is going to be the next scenario that we're going to see. And this will go on, and the United States playing with different great powers, one way or the other, using them against each other in order to maintain its own leadership. It will remain the center. Now, geopolitics of the theories, or the theories of geopolitics were devised in order to explain this particular process, how a single center shall emerge and what it implies for the world in the future. That is why the word itself, as I said, appeared as a neologism only in 1899. It was invented by Rudolf Schelling in Sweden. He invented this word as well as another word, ecopolitics, you might say, ecopolitik and geopolitik. These are the two words he did. Ecopolitik we've forgotten about. Geopolitik continues, or geopolitics, for us to help, for us to understand what we are, the world in which we are engaged. Now, in what sense is the unity of the world then to be fully understood? If at that time they saw that the world is divided into so many, divided among so many great powers, Schelling and people like that first thought of the combinations of great powers, which will create that, account for that unity or handle that unity. In which combination would they appear? So the first assumption was that there would be one grouping under the United States, along with Britain and France. The other would be Germany, and it would dominate the whole of the Eurasian world. This is how Schelling saw it. And it would, he imagined it eventually as a sort of equilibrium between the two. And the domination of Europe by Germany was essential to keep the Russian barbarian at bay, or what they called Asiatic barbarian, in one way or the other, at bay. Of course, Germany was defeated in the First World War, and therefore it had to be revised. Would that Asiatic barbarian would be the new leader of Europe or not, was the matter of some uncertainty there. But this was how it was first imagined. But the one who saw it most clearly and emphatically was Halford Mackinder in Britain in 1904, when he, it was a simple lecture that he gave to the Royal Geographical Society, which has had a long-lasting influence, and all theorists of geopolitics and students of geopolitics have had to study it and analyze it in considerable detail. Now, what he saw was there is a clear distinction between the world of the Atlantic civilizations and the Eurasian one. The Atlantic one would be, as I said, dominated by America, Britain. The Eurasian one by Germany. And he made the contrast most emphatically for the powers that they wield. The major point he made was that Britain has lost her leadership, not that she is going to continue to maintain it. She has lost her leadership because the basis on which she held her leadership for 400 years or 300 years was sea power. And sea power had ceased to be the determinant of global domination any longer, or of global expansion in any real sense. Because the world is closed, sea power had reached its limit, and now land power would assert itself over this owing to new technologies. And from the audience, Leo Amery said, it's not just land power, but air power. And because of and this is as early as 1904, he was saying it, when air power has hardly begun. Just about managed to fly into the air, but he had already seen the future of air power. And once you have air power, sea power and land power are superseded by the sheer technology of reaching any part of the world by air. The advantage of sea power is that you could reach any part of the world by sea more cheaply and more effectively, and transport many more resources to any corner of the world by sea, which you could not do by land. So it was Britain, which was a small island country off the west coast of Europe, that could actually be able to dominate the whole world to the extent that it did through the British Empire, or considerable domination. Whereas such huge land masses, land empires, as the Russian, the Chinese, and so on, could come nowhere near it. To Russia, the whole theory was that the fact that it had so much land was a disadvantage. It could not reach from European Russia to the Eastern Russia, to the Pacific, owing to the sheer territory that it had to traverse. And the building of the Trans-Siberian Railway was considered one of the greatest achievements, strategic achievements of the Russian Empire. Well, it was hardly strategic because it just about managed to get there. And it was demonstrated so effectively when the Russians were defeated by the Japanese Empire in 1904, roundly defeated. After the Russian Navy managed to go circumscribe the whole world and reach Japan, only to be destroyed on the very day that it arrived there. So it showed that having a huge land empire is not necessarily the advantage that it was assumed to be, that you must have the capacity to reach every part of the world and attack where you want, and have the flexibility that it would provide. And that is what sea power provided. But now both are going to be superseded by air power, is what Mackinder's lecture showed, along with Amery's insights. It was combined, I would say. And the groupings in the world would be transformed entirely. It would, of course, sea power and land power would remain of vital importance, but the combination of the three together would make a dramatic change. So in that situation, he foresaw the end of the domination or the superiority of the British Empire as early as 1904. And it would require something else for Britain to be able to dominate. And if it was to continue, it would need to master air power and get allies and create a grouping in the manner it was doing already of the United States and others. Only that would enable it to dominate what would now be a united world. But he had the further insight that if you are going to have the world divided in this particular way, and you have to have groupings, it would have to be culturally and ideologically compatible with each other. So if the United States is going to lead a grouping, they have to be culturally compatible in the sense of being democratic, as he called it. He already foresaw what is later, after the Cold War, became to be called the free world. The British Empire was hardly the free world then, given that it had an empire and not a free world. But they already imagined that there would be a free world and that India would belong to the free world. And he looked forward, an arch-imperialist and racist like him, it's extraordinary. He actually looked forward to the day when India would be constitutionally and ideologically aligned with the British because of an internal development of liberal and constitutional structures. He could not quite bring himself to say democratic and independent, and as an association of free globe of the free world, it is much too early for him to be able to think in such terms or say it out properly. But he was clearly heading in that direction. Where would you place India? It'll have to be a free association of some kind in the future. That is how India would be an effective partner in that grouping. But he saw India as belonging there. And as you know, much of the European world believed in the interwar years that India would in some sense be an alliance partner of the Western Alliance, of the whole Atlantic grouping. And it came to them as a bit of a root shock that India would remain neutral or non-aligned, as Nehru eventually made it. But that was very unexpected on their part, and they always suspected that India was a closet Soviet agent of some kind. And they still can't get over the fact that that may not have been the case. But he saw all the dimensions of this, that there will be geographical spaces which are so divided, there will be power groupings of this sort, that they'll become ideologically and culturally compatible also in the course of that. Now, this is the first aspect of the geopolitical theory, that there is a unity or a unified world which now has to have a single center of power. That is the first aspect of it that they all theorized upon. And the second part of it is these groupings. Now, what are these groupings and how did they come about? And this is where the Germans made the greatest contribution, what they call the Großraum, or the greater space. It really just means a power block. It's unfortunately wrongly translated into English as greater space or larger space. That's a literal dictionary translation of the German word Großraum. It just means a power block, an association of great powers with a superpower above them, directing them all in a hierarchy and placing them under their single command and acting as an association. The living example of it that we see all the time, that is the United States. As it functions as a leader of the Western Alliance, you have the series of great powers under it who are satellites, effectively. Britain, France, now Germany, Japan also. Earlier it was not Germany, Japan, just Britain and France. And a whole series of powers further down in the hierarchy. All of them leading up to, as in pyramidal form, up to the United States. This is one Großraum. And it can be scattered all over the world. The British Empire itself is scattered around the world. It is not limited to the Western Hemisphere by any means. And they were all, they communicated and were accessible to, through a combination of sea power and air power. And they made their power projections anywhere in the world through those efforts in this way. So the Großraum was a typical example that would be provided by the United States. And the Germans were deeply impressed by it. The theorists like Haushofer and most of all Carl Schmitt, who was the academic jurist and philosopher who theorized about it. And as they explained it, especially Schmitt explained it, it was the United States provided the model in the form of the Monroe Doctrine arrangement. That is, the United States declared that the whole of the Western Hemisphere is not available for any more changes. It did not say that nobody can have colonies there, but the existing colonies of Spain and Portugal there will continue there. It will remain as it is. It cannot be transformed in any way. And European politics is not to be imported into the Western Hemisphere. It will be a domain of United States domination only, and it will be a status quo will have to be observed by the rest of the powers of the world. At least this is how Carl Schmitt and the German theorists understood it. I mean, there might be the disagreements as to whether they were technically correct or not, but it was understood in this particular way. And this particular model is what Carl Schmitt then wanted for Germany. He, as you know, was a jurist in the interwar years, and he always theorized and explained how America was unilaterally imposing its universalist ideals upon the rest of the world after the First World War. He did not take for literal or understand in any sense as literal American isolationism. He said American isolationism is only American unilateralism, and America is going to impose its policies on the rest of the world, and that is universalist, abstract, decided by itself, and it applicable in the whole world. The particular reason he found it offensive was not merely that American power would be projected right across the world, and therefore right across Europe and across Germany also, but that because it was universalist, it denied or ignored all the particular or particularist historical experiences of the rest of the world. What was stated in abstract form as human rights and liberal jurisprudence and all the international relations theories that derived from it would be applicable under American guidance throughout the world. This is the post-Versailles arrangements that he saw as most objectionable and dangerous to Europe. And he saw it as particularly obnoxious to Europe because Germany was aspiring to impose precisely that form of leadership over Europe. But the basis on which he claimed a German leadership over Europe was not universalist. That only America was. He contrasted it by arguing that Germany is historical and particularist and responding to European culture and European history and European experiences over the past 1,000 years. America has a completely different range of experience. It does not understand Europe, and it has no place in Europe. That is how he put it. So Germany as a leader of Europe, after all it was, as the Germans always assumed, it was the Germans who led Europe in medieval times, and now into modern times it is re-establishing that leadership. It is the Germans who would be leading it, and he provided an ideological foundation to the first 2 years of Hitler's regime in the Second World War. That is, as up to the time that Hitler's winning the war between 1939 and 41. He did not endorse the subsequent regime, that is the regime of total war and genocidal extremes. He did not, but he was accused of that, but he didn't. What he wanted was a time of German domination, and that domination would be based upon these particular experiences of Germany and of Europe in particular, and how different it was from the American one. So he made a clear distinction between what is now what was earlier called a Eurasianist domain of Europe plus Russia, and the Atlanticist one. The two are distinct, and Europe would provide the alternative. As you can see in this sort of a claim, despite the extraordinary power projection of the Nazi regime across Europe and across the world at that time, it was actually a defensive position, that it is particularist and historical, deriving from European experiences alone. He did not have the confidence to claim that this was going to be universal, like the Americans did, that it is applicable to the whole world. The ideological positions of the European conquests at that time would not be projected around the world. America could do so. It is all based upon human rights across the world, and therefore inviting everybody in the world to join in the campaign for asserting human rights and a liberal jurisprudence. That is obviously not what the Germans are doing. Theirs was a theory of race, and they could not offer it to the rest of the world on the same terms. It was therefore particularist to Europe, and therefore of European domination of other parts of the world. It was a defensive position against the American. You can see in the manner in which the ideology has been constructed, there's a sense of weakness compared to America and the Atlantic world. It was not able to create a total universal claim of its own. But so immense was the power that was generated in Germany and by the German conquest that they had a certain confidence about being able to dominate the world, especially as the Axis powers. And the Axis powers became the other Großraum. So that you had these two Großraums facing each other, which was how it was in the Second World War. The Soviet Union, of course, is an uncertain element. The Soviet Union appeared on both sides, as you know. Between 1939 and 41, the Soviet Union was on the German side. And 41 onward, it was on the Atlantic side. So it does appear in both places. One further indication of the inadequacy and weakness of the Soviet Union. It had to defend itself by joining one side or the other. A larger version of what Italy was doing, if you remember, in the First World War, when for 2 years it was on one side and the next 2 years on the other side, the winning side, as it happened. A similar situation occurred here. Now, in this kind of a structure, how is the Großraum different from an empire, the colonial empire? It'd be important for us to theoretically establish that. In the colonial empire, there was a metropolis and a periphery, and the metropolis directly controlled the periphery. It ruled it for its own benefit and through an exploitation through that. But there was nothing more than that. Here in the Großraum, it structured a hierarchy, an alliance of coercively led by the leader, of course. It has to be coercive and centralized power in this, whichever the center was. And it would lead it as an alliance system against the challenger, whoever it was. But otherwise, it left all the internal arrangements as it was in each of these places. Whatever the constitutional structures there were and what their nationalist aspirations or ambitions were all retained. But for strategic purposes, they came under the leadership of a single center. And that is how the Großraum was constructed. Of course, that is necessarily ambiguous, because if you do have a leader of a order of a pyramid of this sort, finally they have to be made internally compatible, as Mackinder said very rightly. And if they have to be made internally compatible, therefore the internal structures of power cannot remain exactly as they were earlier. Nationalist or ideological or cultural, they'll have to be adjusted to the requirements of the leader of the Großraum. And if it is the American, there'll have to be appropriate adjustments be made. And that will be coercively applied as and when the leader would seek to do so. And this would be the main idea of what became geopolitical theory in the years up to the Second World War and during the Second World War. That the world is now unified, there has to be a center of power, and these are wars to determine which the center of power is. And it will be fought between Großraums, not between nations. The whole idea of nationalist rivalry and nationalist conflict is completely subordinated to the Großraum fighting each other. The two Großraums fighting each other. And it is not any longer a nationalist war, was the point being made in geopolitical theory. The First World War was emphatically a nationalist war, yes. It hadn't yet become the Großraum. By the time of the Second World War, the Großraum was very much in evidence. It had ceased to be a purely nationalist war. And it had become something else. Now, what happens after 1945 is the big question. After 1945, the time of grand theory and of geopolitical theory comes to an end, in a sense. because it is established now that there is a single center in the world, and that's in the United States. All the others are not challengers, but they're just enclaves, like the Soviet Union, which have not fully accepted American leadership, but otherwise have accepted it by being in a defensive posture and only trying to retain as much as possible autonomy within their own area. That is why geopolitical theory was no longer, did not enjoy the high favor it did during the years, in the interwar years, and especially the Second World War. It had come to an end. And that has continued all the way beyond that. Now when we apply the term geopolitics very loosely, it generally means just political rivalry or strategic rivalry in particular areas. If you talk of a geopolitical rivalry in Central Asia, Southeast Asia, or the Middle East and so on, it means the rivalries between the local powers. But nothing is ever local. In every one of them, the United States is playing a role, necessarily. What is common to every area, wherever there is a geopolitical rivalry of any kind, the United States is playing a very major role. A leading role, you might say, whether you like it or not, whether it is obvious or not. You might have China, Russia, and so on playing their own roles there, but the determining factor would always be the United States in one way. That's how it becomes geopolitical. Otherwise, it is just a local conflict of some kind or the other. But it becomes geopolitics only if the United States is there. And the United States is necessarily there in every conflict in the world today, practically. If there isn't, it means it is so local that it doesn't concern the United States. But it's not because it is unable to play a role. It can, whenever it wishes to. So it is, the use of the term is partially emptied of meaning because there's no longer competitions between gross realms. And it has meaning as indicating the United States as playing a role in regional conflicts, whichever they be, whatever they be. So whenever we talk of the geopolitics of the Indian Ocean or the geopolitics of God knows where else, it is what is the United States doing there and how is it structuring the conflict in so many different ways. It always has to be one way or the other that way. Now, I see my time is running out, so I just wanted to discuss one extra point, which would be of importance, would be in your minds. Why did the Germans talk about, in their theories of geopolitics, about something called Lebensraum? You've heard this only too well in Nazi political theory. What did they mean by Lebensraum, and why do they have to talk about it always? Now, Lebensraum is part of a general theory of the nature of the growth of the state, as elaborated by German theorists from the 19th century, which is that the organic state, it grows like an organism in nature. And you survive only by growing. A plant keeps growing, and as long as it's growing, it survives. And the moment it stops growing, it dies. That's how it is understood. Organisms die the moment they stop growing. The state, similarly. In the 19th century, it was a great favorite to look upon everything in organic terms. So they cease to exist, cease to be alive when they stop growing. So the German state was first seen as growing endlessly. And the sheer expansion and dynamism in the German state seemed to demonstrate the validity of that proposition, that as long as it was expanding, it was growing. So it had to keep finding spaces into which to grow. Otherwise, it will come to its end. This is the Lebensraum. In order to continue to exist, it has to find spaces to grow into. And since the world had already been partitioned out, Germany had no place to grow into. Africa had gone, but China was in an uncertain balance because all the great powers had been competing and they'd carved out spaces for themselves. India was gone to Britain, and so on. So Germany would have to carve out new spaces for continued existence. That is the theory. And hence the Lebensraum eastward, living space eastward. The peculiarity of it is that there were not enough Germans to go and occupy Russia. They wanted Russia as the Lebensraum, but statistically there were not enough Germans to go and occupy that space when the opportunity came during the Second World War. But that is not the importance of it. It is the importance that you must go and conquer those spaces in order to keep on growing. It developed out of that theory that there has to be continuous expansion. Everybody else is expanding, and so this also. But it was not only the Germans who had this, developed this theory. People like Spikeman in America in the 1940s, when he wrote his books on geography, made exactly the same arguments. The state exists by growing. And if the moment the growth ceases, the state ceases to exist. It begins to die, is the argument. So growth has to be demonstrated in some way or the other. And others altered the argument to say it doesn't have to be a physical space, a territorial space you expand into. The growth can take the form of economic growth by itself. Technological and economic growth, which will give you more and more capacities. That is a form of growth. That is what we now understand as the common sense of economic growth. We all subscribe to that. And if you don't have economic growth, we are dying in some sense. We want it all the time. The moment that stops, it's a matter of very serious crisis. But at that time, it is understood territorially. That is the most important part of it. And that is the Lebensraum, and that is what Haushofer, Haushofer's name is identified always with the theory of Lebensraum. And he made also the dubious statistical calculations about demographic expansion and the need for physical space to survive and the rest. But it's not necessary to go into all those. But this was the origin of the idea of geopolitics. All the revolutionary changes that took place in the late 19th century, amongst them this, that the world was closed, therefore the unified world, and therefore the world competitions take place through growth rounds, not through nations or nationalism, and not through empires any longer. It is something else. And finally, in the elimination rounds, there will be one leader left in the world. And that is how the United States is conceived of today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for that insightful, informative, and illuminating keynote address. I would request the audience to give a big round of applause. Now I would request the chair of the session, Dr. Seshadri Chari, to give the closing remarks. Over to you, sir.
You will all agree with me that it's difficult to really encompass what Professor Palat has said in a few words. It's a very, very long journey of geopolitics that he has covered. Practically, what I generally refer to as a journey from Bretton Woods to BRICS. Bretton Woods to BRICS. The last BRICS meeting was quote unquote referred to as de-dollarization meeting. And exactly 80 years back, in 1944, the first meeting of Bretton Woods, which took place, established dollar as a global currency. So the process of globalization, or rather what Professor Palat has referred to as unification, global unification, started in 1944. And in these 80 years, we have seen how things have changed. And in this global unification, many actors, many players have come and gone. Some players have stayed on. And some new players have come in. And that is exactly what brings us to the main theme of this particular conference, the issue of contestation, geopolitical contestation. Geopolitical contestation is all about players trying to influence one another and establish themselves as the leader of a world order which is practically not defined. There is no defined world order. We know United Nations as a defined organization. World order is not an established institutionalized form. So this uninstitutionalized form is what is called the world order. And who leads the world order? It's greatly enigmatic, but the subject has been discussed, and this is what we are all coming to discuss and work on this. It has been a very great beginning. So what has begun very well, I'm sure is going to end very well also. So as our Honorable Vice Chancellor said, the new set of students, the future thinkers of this country and also for the international arena, are going to debate this whole issue of nationalism versus internationalism, and what are the dominant features that are going to establish in this contestation. Is it going to be nationalism versus internationalism, or is it going to be nationalism and internationalism, not as a conflicting ideas, but as a contributory ideas? So these are all some of the issues that we will be discussing in the next 2.5 days. And also, this whole debate which begins will probably continue, and people like Alka, Acharya would take it to the 18th and 19th and 20th, and we don't know how many more AICCS will take place before we are able to really conclude what's really happening as far as the emerging world order is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now I'll call upon stage Dr. Anand V, co-convener of the 17th AICCS, to give the vote of thanks.
Good morning to all. It is my honor to deliver the vote of thanks of the inaugural session of the 17th All India Conference on China Studies. The event marks the beginning of what promises to be an engaging and intellectually stimulating conference at a time when huge uncertainties are looming over world politics. First and foremost, I would like to extend our deepest gratitude to Lieutenant General Dr. M.D. Venkatesh for his opening address. His thoughtful insights and words of encouragement and support have provided a strong foundation for the deliberations ahead. A special thanks to Professor Madhavan Palat for his enlightening keynote address. Sir, your deep and incisive reflections have added immense value to the inaugural session, setting the stage for a meaningful exploration of China studies through the prism of geopolitics. It was a delight to listen to your scholarly exposition on geopolitical theory and concepts like gross Raum. Your view of geopolitical history as a series of elimination rounds is indeed interesting and insightful. We are profoundly grateful to Professor Alka Acharya for her warm and inspiring welcome remarks. Your leadership and commitment to fostering scholarship in this field continue to inspire all of us. Our heartfelt appreciation goes to Professor Venkat Raman for his convener's remarks. Your vision and effort in curating this conference are evident in the quality and depth of the program, which you will be witness to. A sincere thanks to Professor M.D. Nalapat for sharing your special remarks, which provided unique perspectives and greatly enriched the session with your realist vision. Sir, your stark and practical warning reverberates with that of the realist geopolitical strategist over the several generations, from Kautilya to Spikeman. Dr. Seshadri Chari, thank you for chairing the inaugural session. Your guidance has ensured that the discussions were both enriching and engaging for all the attendees. A warm thank you to my colleague, Dr. Amrita Jash, for seamlessly introducing the speakers and guiding us through the proceedings of this inaugural session. Your efforts ensured a seamless flow and helped set the tone for the conference. To our esteemed audience, including the participants, distinguished guests, and the students and faculty from the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, MAHE, along with those from MAHE and various universities across India, thank you for your active engagement and presence. Your enthusiasm is the driving force behind the success of this conference, and I urge you to continue this support of yours for the remaining sessions. Lastly, I would like to acknowledge the contributions of everyone behind the scenes, the organizing team at MAHE and ICS, the funding partners, MEA PPNR Division and ICSSR, and the knowledge partners, JANUTech and RIS, the student volunteers from the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, and the technical staff from the department and MAHE, who have worked tirelessly to make this event possible. My colleagues have also done a lot of help to make this conference possible, so my deep gratitude to them as well. As we embark on the next phases of this conference, let us carry forward the ideas and inspiration from this inaugural session to foster deeper understanding and collaboration in the field of China studies. Thank you once again, and I wish everyone a fruitful and successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anand. Before we conclude, I would like to invite Dr. Chari to extend a token of appreciation to each of our esteemed dignitaries. It's an eco-friendly, handcrafted small item by the local artisans of Udupi. Professor Palat. Professor Nalapat. Professor Venkat Raman. And last but not the least, Professor Alka Acharya. I would request everyone to give a big round of applause for the plenary session. And with this, we conclude the inaugural session.